In today's lecture, I'm going to introduce you to biodiversity. What is biodiversity? The word biodiversity is a short form for biological diversity. It is defined by the Convention on Biological Diversity, or the CBD, as the variability among living organisms from all sources, including inter alia, terrestrial, marine, and other aquatic ecosystems, and the ecological complexes of which they are part. This includes diversity within species, between species, and of ecosystems. Biodiversity also refers to the diversity of genes, populations, species, communities, and ecosystems. All this together underlies all ecological processes. Ecological processes interacting with atmosphere, geosphere, and hydrosphere determine the environment on which organisms, including us, people, depend upon. If you don't understand very well what does these ecological processes are all about, you don't have to worry. We have the whole semester to understand everything about it. This is a photo of a tropical rainforest, a type of forest very common to Malaysia and Indonesia. In this photo, you will be able to see different kinds of plants. And these different kinds of plants is just one representation of how biologically diverse our forest is. In this photo, you will see two different kinds of ecosystems. One is a forest ecosystem, and the other one is an aquatic ecosystem, or the river. This photo shows another kind of environment wherein we can observe different life forms. The very obvious ones are the plants. If you're just going to look closely, you will be able to identify different species of plants in the area. Also, probably not very obvious, but I'm sure they are there, are insects, animals, and other creatures both on the soil and also in the water. This is an example of another ecosystem, marine ecosystem. In here, we will be able to see different species of corals and different species of fish. There are also many microorganisms in here that are very difficult to be seen by the naked eye. They are the zooplanktons and the phytoplanktons. This is another example of marine ecosystem. Just observe how different the corals are and the fishes are. From the previous slides, you were able to see how rich our biodiversity is in terms of different kinds of ecosystems, different kinds of species of plants, and some animals that you have seen. Our rich biodiversity constitutes an extraordinary natural capital that maintains our natural environment and the life support systems that give us food, water, and numerous economic benefits. We depend on it for our very existence. We are depending very much on biodiversity, not only for the food and the water we need to survive, but also for our economic development. We log our forests, we cut down our trees, and we convert the forests into agricultural plantations like this one that you see in the photo. Vast areas of forest are now converted into oil palm plantations. And this is now a very common sight in our forests. So let us define what biodiversity is again. Biodiversity is the diversity of life on Earth. It refers to all organisms found within the living world. That includes the number of organisms, variety of organisms, variability of organisms. So everything, every life on Earth is called biodiversity. And that also includes the variety of life and its processes. In other words, biodiversity is the essence of life. So again, let's see what biodiversity is. Biodiversity includes all forms of life and the ecosystems of which they are part of. Biodiversity nurtures people and contributes to long-term food security for all. The food that we eat, they are all sourced or coming from biodiversity. The crops that we plant in agriculture, these are all biodiversity. The climate that controls the growth of these crops, these are all modified by biodiversity. Biodiversity also forms the foundations for sustainable development. It is also the basis for the environmental health of our planet and the source of economic and ecological security for future generations. Most of the economy of developing nations like Malaysia, Indonesia, and other countries in the Southeast Asian region are all biodiversity based, which means we rely on agriculture, we rely on forest products, on marine resources, and also energy that will help uplift our own economies. You have heard many times, because we keep on repeating that biodiversity is the essence of life. Now, let's see in more details of why biodiversity is important to us. In the developing world, biodiversity provides the assurance of food, raw materials such as fiber for clothing, materials for shelter, fuel, and medicines. All of these are found in nature. The rural poor depends on biological resources for an estimated 90% of their needs. They don't need shopping malls. They don't need to go out and buy their things from the store. All they have to do in the rural communities, they just have to go out of their houses and explore the environment and get the things that they would need. On the other hand, in the industrialized world, like developed countries, they access diverse biological resources that is necessary to support a vast array of their industrial products. And biodiversity maintains the ecological balance necessary for planetary and human survival. The last two items in here, I think we will need to discuss more in details in the coming weeks of the semester. So again, just to recap, biodiversity is the short form for biological diversity. And biodiversity is defined in terms of genes, species, and ecosystems, corresponding to three fundamental and hierarchically related levels of biological organization. Now, let us learn more about genes, about species, and about ecosystems. Let's start with genes or genetic diversity. Genetic diversity refers to the variation of genes and genotypes between and within species. Genetic diversity is also the sum of total varied genetic information contained in the genes of individual plants, animals, and microorganisms that inhabit the earth. The diversity within species gives the ability to adapt or resist changes in environment, climate, and agricultural methods, or the presence of pests and diseases. This is an example of genetic diversity. All of these are commonly called chili, or the scientific name is Capsicum annum. All of these small individual items in here is just one species. But we can see the genetic variation within the species. We have the small chili, the very hot chili, we have the bell pepper, we have these longer chilies, and in your local languages, you call each one of it differently. But scientifically, they are just one and the same species, Capsicum annum. This is to show another example of genetic diversity. All of these are called eggplant or brinjal. Scientifically, it is called Solanum melongena. We can see different sizes, different shapes, different colors. But all of these, we know that this is just all belong to the species of Solanum melongena or eggplant. Another example of genetic diversity. Scientific name of this is Brassica oleracea. Brassica oleracea. But we have English names for each and every one of these. We have the green cabbage, we have the purple cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli. All of these are coming from the same species but genetically very varied. So in the kitchen, each one of these we have preparing a special dish. Again, another example of genetic diversity. These are roses, and there are different colors, different sizes, and different forms of roses. We have the long stem roses, Ecuadorian roses, the nice smelling roses, and the not so nice smelling roses. All of these are called rosa species. This is the last example of genetic diversity I'm going to show you. The scientific name of this organism is Felis catus. Felis catus, commonly known as cats or kucing. Many of you likes cat, and you have not only 4 or 5, some of you have more than 8 or more than 10 cats in your homes, and you know each one of them individually. The different colors of the fur, the sizes of their eyes, or the way the voices are. These are all genetic variations within the species. Even their behavior. Some of them are very sweet, some of them is very snobbish, and some of them are easily irritated. These are also part of genetic diversity. The next thing we're going to talk about is species diversity. Species diversity refers to variety of species within a given area. It is also synonymous to biodiversity. So when we want to know how biodiversity rich the area is, our answer will be the number of species. So species richness is also equivalent to the number of species in different taxonomic groups. For example, there are about 1.7 million species of plants and animals that have been described worldwide. So that is species diversity. In the previous example of genetic diversity, I showed you the species of chili, Capsicum annum, which has all the genetic diversity. I've shown you brinjal, Solanum melongena, also with variations in genetic diversity. As you would know by now, brinjal or eggplant, as well as chili, and also tomato, they are from the same family, Solanaceae. So the question is, how will you recognize a species? Simple. Tomato is one species. Eggplant is one species. Chili, another species. Cabbage, another species. Cat, one species. Chicken, another species. This is what we call species diversity. Also, just to highlight, the word species can either be plural or singular. 1 species, 5 species. There's no such word as species. So I hope you remember that. This is another example of species diversity. Each one of these butterflies is one species. Another example of species diversity. Each one of these animals is a species on its own. The last component of biodiversity we are talking about this morning is ecosystem diversity. Ecosystem consists of interdependent communities. Interdependent communities means communities that are related to each other and dependent with each other. Interdependent communities of species, complex mixes of diversity between and within species and their environment. The extent of an ecosystem or habitat is imprecise. A single ecosystem may cover thousands of hectares or just a few. And also, if you have two different ecosystems, it is very difficult to delineate or define the boundary that differentiates the two ecosystems. So for example, you have the river, which is a freshwater ecosystem, and that river is leading to the ocean, which is a marine ecosystem. There is no line saying that this is a freshwater ecosystem and that is a marine ecosystem. This is an example of ecosystem diversity. In the foreground, we can see grassland community or grassland ecosystem. And in the further background, we see the lines of trees, which is a forest ecosystem. Another example of ecosystem diversity, we see savanna or an area with very few trees, and probably in the further side of this ecosystem is a desert or an area where vegetation is very, very few or non-existing or not found at all. Another example of ecosystem diversity. How many different kinds of ecosystem can we identify from these photos? On the further right side of the photo, we can see an island or a mountain. So that is one ecosystem, island ecosystem. And in the main photo, we can see all these lush greeneries. This probably is a mangrove ecosystem. And then we can see this river, that river that leads towards the ocean. The river is also another ecosystem and the marine ecosystem on itself. In this one single photo, let's see all the components of biodiversity. Let's begin with ecosystem diversity. So this is a marine ecosystem. And then let's look at the species diversity. How many different species of fishes and corals can you see? And let's go down more into genetic diversity. Focus on the yellow fish. What are the variations that you can see among the different individuals of the yellow fish? Now, probably it's your turn. From this ecosystem, how many different kinds of species do you think you can see from this forest. And what about this ecosystem? What do you call this ecosystem? And what kinds of species do you think are found in this ecosystem? And what about this? What ecosystem is this? And what is that species that you can find in this ecosystem?